So today we are going to continue on labor supply. And so let's start with something I forgot to mention last time. So this is a paper I'm working with my student, my PhD student. So in this paper, we estimate the motherhood penalty, which is the effect of fertility, having a child, uh, actually having more than two children on labor force participation rate. So it's basically the same as Angus and Evans. We use twin births as an exogenous variation. So in the paper in Angus and Evans, they also use twin births as an instrument, as an exogenous variation. So, but what we do in our paper is we estimate the motherhood penalty in a lot of countries, in about 36 countries, and across from 1990 to 2010. So typically, most countries conduct their census every 10 years. So we have 2 to 3 census for each country. So we can look at the cross-country association and also like cross-country association and its and their change over time. Okay, so this is what we find. Okay, so we plot our estimated motherhood penalty with gender wage gap, and as you can see in the left figure, okay, we see that in country with say in country with smaller gender wage gap, their motherhood penalty also smaller. In country with larger gender wage gap, their motherhood penalty also tend to be larger, more negative. Right. So the effects of fertility on their labor force participation rate is more negative. And for example, like we see, like for example, like UK in the 1990s or like USA in the 1990s, they tend to have pretty large gender wage gap, and their motherhood penalty also tend to be large. Okay. And in the right figure, we look at the change over time. Okay, so we plot the change in gender wage gap with the change in motherhood penalty. Okay, and we still see a similar negative associations or correlations, right? So we see that basically in country where gender wage gap, the reduction of gender wage gap is larger, like sorry, like here there's a larger reduction in gender wage gap. Their motherhood penalty also decrease faster. Okay. So overall, so the finding here? So what's the finding here? So the finding is that we find that basically yes, people, so mothers or like women that overall they do respond to market wage, right? They do respond to opportunity costs, right? Because so a reduction in gender wage gap means that the opportunity cost of staying at home and taking care of your children becomes higher. So the reservation wage becomes lower, right? So sorry, let me repeat again. A smaller gender wage gap means that the market wage is relatively high for women, and so the opportunity cost of staying at home is also higher, which means they are more likely to work, right? And we find that that is true across country, and also we find that's true that if the gender wage gap goes down, the motherhood penalty also goes down, right? So women are more likely to participate in the labor market if there's a reduction in the gender wage gap, right? Because that makes their opportunity cost higher and market so a market work becomes more attractive. Okay. Okay. So now let's talk about another empirical paper, Bailey's 2006 paper. So she is an economist at University of Michigan, and this is a very famous paper. So the increase in female labor supply is associated with not only a decrease in number of children, but also a delay in motherhood. So timing is important. So such delay was possible because birth control has become easy for women. Okay, so that's a new technological advance that actually help women can better control the timing of childbirth. So in this paper, her research question is whether easy birth control and the ability to control timing of childbearing causally affect female labor supply. Okay. So can you think about a good research design, a natural experiment? Right. So again, the thought experiment we have is something like, okay, maybe we want to compare a group women who had access to birth control versus a group of women who don't have access to birth control, right? And basically, we want to we want to randomize the access to birth control to the treatment group and to the control group, right? So we want them to be comparable. Okay. Okay. In Bailey 2006 paper, she studies the impacts of the birth control pill on female labor supply. Okay, and we are going to see how does she do that. So she used a natural experiment that early access to the pill was different across states and cohorts. Okay, so let's take a look at the historical background in the US. The first birth control pill, called Envoy, was introduced in 1960 in the US. However, back then, a married woman under the age of 21 cannot obtain the pill without parental consent. Um, During the Vietnam War era, there was increasing political pressure on extending the responsibilities and privilege of legal adulthood to 18 years old men and women. The logic is pretty straightforward, right? So because back then, if you are a man, you are likely to be drafted and sent to Vietnam when you are turn 18 or 19. But you cannot even drink. So you cannot even drink until you reach age 21st. That doesn't make much sense for young people, right? I mean, I could die in Vietnam, and I was asked to kill people, but I cannot even drink. Right, so there's a lot of social pressure that they wanted to make the legal age become 18 years old. So uh, many states started to allow women age 18 to consent to medical treatment. So you don't need your parental consent to get medical treatment. And by extension, that apply to the birth control pill as well. In 1976, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that states cannot use age as the criterion to regulate contraceptive access. Okay, so basically, after 1976, all states allow women age 18 to get birth control pill. Okay. And So let's take a look at the birth rate by. So this is the like uh, first birth in each age group, and this is 1960, and here is 1976. Oh yeah, it's already here, 1976. We see there's a huge uh, drop in terms of birth rate for women age 20 to 24 and 18 to 19 here, right? So we see here, right? Here you see a huge drop in terms of their birth rate. And so there, uh, since the birth control pill came out, we see a huge drop um, in motherhood among like age 18 to 19 and 20 to 24. And we also see that there's actually little change for people without access, those people from 15 to 17, right? So there's little change for them. And also for people 25 to 29 or older age group, we also see little change. Right? So this is suggestive evidence that yes, it seems birth control pill indeed reduce birth rate. Okay, so people seems to have less likely to become mother at the age younger age, like 18 to 19 and 20 to 24. And this is the distribution of age at first birth by birth cohorts. Okay, and this is very interesting. We see that uh, people born in 1955 apparently they delay their birth quite a bit. Like, they delay their first childbirth quite a bit, right? Compared to people born in born in 1940 and before, right? So basically, you can see for people born in the like 1930s and 40s, most of women will have their first child at age 21st. For women born in 1955, still many women will have their first child around age 21st, but the probability is much lower than, right? So it's much lower than people born in the 1940s and 1930s. And we see that there's more women here. So for women born in 1955, we see that they're more likely to have their first birth in age 27, 30, and 33, right, compared to earlier cohort. Right, so basically, we see there's a delay in childbirth for for younger cohorts, right? For women born in 1955 and also women born in 1960s, from this figure, right? So there's a delay of motherhood after the birth control bill came out. Okay, so why? So what? So I mean, in the paper, so she wanted to address the question, the following question. So what was the main impact of early legal access to the pill on women's labor supply? So Bailey, she emphasized that fairly costless control of birth timing may be among the PO's most important contribution. So Bailey put a lot of emphasis on the timing. Okay, not the so she argued that the main impact of birth control pill is not reduce the number of children. So okay, it affects the timing of childbirth. This paper is quite different from the Ivan and Anguish we just talked about before, right? So last time we talked about there's apparently there is indeed a negative causal effect of childbirth of there's indeed a negative causal effect of having children on labor force participation and labor supply in general. Here, it's also the same research question. It's a similar research question about fertility and female labor supply, but Bailey's focus is about the timing, right? The birth control pill and the timing of childbirth, not about the total number of children. Okay, so it's actually quite different research question. So her argument, so she emphasized that the ability to avoid unexpected birth may have larger impacts than the pill's direct effect on fertility on women's labor supply. In fact, the decrease in fertility can only account a small proportion of increase in female labor supply. And the reason is, if you she looks at the data and she finds that there's actually very little decrease in terms of the total number of children a woman would have after the pill. I mean, after the birth control pill came out. So, for example, a woman may still have, say, 3 children, but now it's just she can control the timing. Okay, that's what Bailey wants to emphasize in these papers. So why is birth timing important? So the cost of career investment, like formal schooling, training, or on-the-job experience, become much lower and the expected returns become much higher, right? For example, if you cannot control the timing of birth, there's little incentive for you to study in the university, right? Because you may actually get pregnant during your study, right? Or you may you may get pregnant when you start your new job, right? And we know that's going to be a big interruption to someone's career, right? But if now women can control the timing of birth, then that make much. That makes the that will make their human capital investment become much more attractive, right? So this is the age-specific labor force participation rate by cohort and age from 1900 to 1970. So in the paper, Bailey also shows this figure in terms of the labor supply by age and by cohorts. And first, you can see that for older cohort, those born in the 1940 and before 1940, their labor force participation rate actually goes down from age 20 to age 30, and then goes up after that. So basically, they are having children at their first child at age 21st, roughly, and then they may have the second and third child. And when their children become older, some of them will go back to the labor market. So we see there's actually an increase after roughly age 30, and increase over and it's increasing when they getting older. Okay, but if we look at younger cohort, we don't see that pattern. We see that for younger cohort, the labor force participation rate tend to be increasing since age 20 and keep increasing until 50. Right? So we don't see a significant drop in their early 20s or 20s to 30 years old. Right? If you remember, so last time we talked about some stylized fact about female labor supply. We say that. So first of all, we know that female labor supply increase by cohort. So younger cohort tend to work more at any given age, right? So you can see that, for example, if we look at the age 30, right, you can see younger cohort tend to work much more than older cohort, right? And it's actually for every cohort. So 1960 cohort work more than 1950 cohort, 1950 cohort work more than 1940 cohort, 1940 cohort work more than 1930 cohort at each age, right? At age 30, at age 40, and also maybe at age 50. Okay. And within cohort, we see that the labor supply also increase over time, right? So if we look at like 1950, that's actually increasing over when they're getting older, up to roughly age 50. And similar, even for 1940 cohort, we see that, after the initial drop because of childbirth, we see that their labor force participation rate increase when they're getting older. So it's increasing with age. Okay. But anyway, so however, here what we want to focus is that it appears that younger cohort, probably because the introduction of birth control pill, so the younger cohort here are more likely to control their birth, so we don't see a huge drop in their labor force participation rate in their 20s. Okay. So in the paper, the Bailey conduct a difference in difference estimation. So can you think about what are the treatment and control group in this context? So what are the pre and post period? Okay. It's actually a bit tricky here because so let's see. So first of all, we know some states pass law to allow early access before 1976. We know that because the Supreme Court rule, all states in the U.S. Allows access to birth control pill after 1976. But there are some early adopted states, and there are some states adopted after 1976. So basically, we can think about the treatment group is states that allow early access, and the control group are states that with later access, right? So states that only allows women to, states that only allows early access to birth control pill after 1976. And because only younger cohorts, those younger than age 21st, were affected by the legal change, right? Because older cohort or older women, they already had access. If they were 22 or 25 years old, they already had access to the birth control pill because they don't need the parental consent. So what we want to compare is younger cohorts, those younger than 21st years old versus older cohorts or older women's. Okay, so you can think about the pose, right? Because a difference in difference is like we compare pre-post difference in the treatment group versus the pre-post difference in the control group. That's why we call that difference in difference. So here, the treatment group is early adoptions. Early states. Control group is later states. And the pre-post is not really time period. The pre-post here is younger cohort versus older cohorts. Sorry. To implement difference in difference in the regression framework, if you remember, we can use fixed effect regression. We put a bunch of fixed effects in the regression to implement the difference in difference research design. So this is the effects of early legal access to PO on timing of birth. The dependent variable is whether or not a woman had their first birth, her first birth before age 22. Okay, so it's a dummy variable. And because the dependent variable is a dummy variable, a binary variable, right? So a binary variable only takes 0 and 1. So we can interpret the estimate here. Sorry, we can interpret the estimate here as probability. Okay. So let's take a look. So in column 1, we see so the estimate suggests about a 7 percentage points reduction in the probability of having the first birth before age 21st. Okay. And you can see that this is a fixed effect regression, so the control for. So S means state fixed effect, C means cohort fixed effects. If you remember, it just means that if you want to do difference in difference, you need to control for the fixed effect. So here, if we control for state fixed effect, we control for anything that fixed within a state that does not change over time. We control for cohort fixed effect. That means we control for everything within the cohort that does not that does not change by states. And effectively, this fixed effect will create the difference in difference estimates. Okay, and so yeah, so we see that in the first column, so the effect's about 7 percentage point. In the second column is 7.6 percentage point. So in the second column, it's in the second column, it's just increase a bit more the interaction between the state fixed effect and cohort fixed effect, but the result is essentially the same. Okay, so we find that yes, indeed the effects of the early legal access to birth control pill did decrease the likelihood of having a baby before age 22. Right. And it's roughly about like 15% percent change, right? Because the best rate is about 0.5, right? And for 0.07 for 7 percentage point, which means it's about 14% decrease, right? It's a 14% decrease. So this is percentage point, but we can, with the base rate here, 0.5, we can calculate the percent change. Right. Remember, if we wanted to do the, if we want to calculate like elasticity, it's always, we need to use the percent change. Okay, so here then we look at the effects of early legal access on POs on labor force participation rate. Okay, so again, the dependent variable is a dummy variable, a binary variable. So one is means the a woman is in the labor force. So again, we can interpret these estimates. So these estimates represent the probabilities. And let's just focus on here. So we see that the effects of early legal access to birth control pill increase women 26 to 30 years old women by about 4 percentage points. Okay. And also increase women age 31 to 35 about 2 percentage points. So these estimates are quite not very big, but they are indeed statistically significant. Okay. And to show that this is indeed a result by the delay timing of birth, in the last column here, she showed that she estimates the same regression, but so she estimates the same regression using women who already had their first birth before age 22, and we find that so there's no effects for these women in terms of there's no effects on their labor force participation rate, and that's is a so that's essentially a that's indirect evidence supporting that yes the finding yes the increase in female labor force participation rate here is indeed caused by a delay of their first birth. Okay. So here it's just a summary of her findings. So she finds that early legal access to PO decrease the probability of having first birth before age 22 by about 7 to 8 percentage point, which is roughly 14% decrease. She finds that early legal access to PO increased labor force participation rate by 4 percentage point, which is equivalent to a 7% increase for women aged 26 to 30, and 2 percentage point, which is equivalent to 3% increase for women aged 31 to 35. Interestingly, she doesn't find so the labor force participation rate for 21 to 25-year-old women actually does not change, but they are actually more likely to enroll in school. If you read the paper, you will see that she shows that even though the labor force participation rate doesn't change, so here, right, so these are for age 21 to 25, we don't see their labor force participation rate change, even though they are supposedly to be affected by the birth control pill. We don't see that their labor force participation rate change, but in the paper, Bailey actually find that they are more likely to enroll in school. That and that implies they are very likely to be in the labor market in the future when they become older. As a robustness check, she does not find any effect on labor force participation rate for women who had a birth before 22. Right? So that's here, right? That's here, right? We find nothing for women already had birth. Hours of work for women aged 21 to 25 and 31 to 35 also had increased. Okay, so if you have time, read the paper, that's table 5 in the paper. Okay, so let's take a break.